A series of unfortunate events. The Reptile Room, Chapter 5. That night felt like the longest and most terrible the Baudelaire orphans have ever had. And they'd had plenty. There was one night shortly after Sonny was born that all three children had a horrible flu, and tossed and turned in the grasp of a terrible fever, while their father tried to soothe them all at once, placing cold washcloths over their sweaty brows. The night after their parents had been killed, the three children had stayed at Mr. Poe's house, and had stayed up all night, too miserable and confused to even try to sleep. And of course, they spent many a long and terrible night while living with Count Olaf. But this particular night seemed worse. From the moment Monty's arrival until bedtime, Stefano kept the children under his constant surveillance, a phrase which here means kept watching them so they wouldn't possibly talk to Uncle Monty alone and reveal that he was really Count Olaf. And Uncle Monty was too preoccupied to think that anything unusual was going on. When they brought in the rest of Uncle Monty's purchases, Stefano carried bags with only one hand, keeping the other one in his coat pocket where the long knife was hidden. But Uncle Monty was too excited about all the new supplies to ask about it. When they went into the kitchen to prepare dinner, Stefano smiled menacingly at the children as he sliced mushrooms. But Uncle Monty was too busy making sure the stroganoff sauce didn't boil to even notice that Stefano was using his own threatening knife for the chopping. Over dinner, Stefano told funny stories and praised Monty's scientific work. And Uncle Monty was so flattered he didn't even think to guess that Stefano was holding a knife under the table, rubbing the blade gently against Violet's knee for the entire meal. And when Uncle Monty announced that he would be spending the evening showing his new assistant around the reptile room, he was too eager to realize that the Baudelaire simply went up to bed without a word. For the first time, having individual rooms seemed like a hardship rather than a luxury. But without one another's company, orphans felt even more lonely and helpless. Violet stared at the papers tacked to her wall and tried to imagine what Stefano was planning. Klaus sat in his large cushioned chair and turned on his brass reading lamp, but was too worried to even open a book. Sunny stared at her hard objects, but didn't bite a single one of them. All three children thought of walking down the hall to Uncle Monty's room and tell him what Stefano was up to. But to get to his room, they would have to walk past the room in which Stefano was staying, and all night long Stefano kept watch in a chair placed in front of his open door. When the orphans opened their doors to peer down the dark hallway, they saw Stefano's pale, shaved head, which seemed to be floating above his body in darkness, and they would see his knife, which Stefano was moving slowly like a pendulum of a grandfather clock. Back and forth it went, back and forth, glinting in the dim light. And the sight was so fearsome they didn't dare try walking down the hallway. Finally, the light in the house turned the pale blue-gray of early dawn, and the Baudelaire children walked wearily down the stairs to breakfast. Tired and achy from their sleepless night, they sat around the table where they had eaten cake on their first morning at the house, and picked listlessly at their food. For the first time since their arrival at Uncle Monty's, they were not eager to enter the reptile room and begin the day's work. "I suppose we have to go now," Violet said, finally putting aside her scarcely nibbled toast. "I'm sure Uncle Monty has already started working and is expecting us, and I'm sure Stefano is there too," Klaus said, staring glumly into his cereal bowl. "We'll never get a chance to tell Uncle Monty what we know about him." "Yinga," Sunny said, sadly, dropping her untouched straw carrot to the floor. "If only Uncle Monty knew what we knew," Violet said, "and Stefano knew that he knew what we know, but Uncle Monty doesn't know what we know, and Stefano knows that he doesn't know what we know." "I know," Klaus said. "I know you know," Violet said. "But what we don't know is what Count Olaf, Stefano, is really up to. He's after a fortune, certainly, but how can he get it if we're under Uncle Monty's care?" "Maybe he's just gonna wait until you're of age and steal the fortune," Klaus said. "4 years is a long time to wait," Violet said. The three orphans were quiet, as each remembered where they had been 4 years ago. Violet had been 10, and had worn her hair very short. She remembered that sometime around her 10th birthday, she had invented a new kind of pencil sharpener. Klaus had been about 8, and he remembered how interested he had been in comets, reading all the astronomy books his parents had in their library. Sunny, of course, had not been born 4 years ago, and she sat and tried to remember what that was like. Very dark, she thought, with nothing to bite. For all three youngsters, 4 years did seem like a very long time. Come on, come on. You were moving very slowly this morning, Uncle Monty said, bursting into the room. His face seemed even brighter than usual, and he was holding a small bunch of folded papers in one hand. Stefano has only worked here for one day, and he's already in the reptile room. In fact, he was up before I was. I ran into him on my way down the stairs. He's an ear beaver. So you three, you're moving like the Hungarian sloth snake, whose top speed is half an inch per hour. We have lots to do today, and I'd like to catch the 6 o'clock showing of Zombies in the Snow tonight. So let's try to hurry. I looked at Uncle Monty and realized that this might be the only opportunity to talk to him alone without Stefano around. But he seemed so wound up that they were sure if he would listen to them. Speaking of Stefano, she said timidly, we'd like to talk to you about him. Uncle Monty's eyes widened, and he looked around him as if there were spies in the room, before leaning in to whisper to the children. "I'd like to talk to you too," he said. "I have my suspicions about Stefano, and I'd like to discuss them with you." The Baudelaire orphans looked at one another in relief. "You do?" Klaus said. "Of course," Uncle Monty said. "Last night I began to get very suspicious about the new assistant of mine. There's something a little spooky about him." And Uncle Monty looked around again and began speaking even softer, so the children had to hold their breaths to hear him. "And I think we should discuss it outside, shall we?" The children nodded in agreement, and rose from the table, leaving their dirty breakfast dishes behind, which is not a good thing to do in general, but perfectly acceptable in the face of an emergency. They walked with Uncle Monty to the front entryway, past the painting of two snakes entwined together, out the front door and into the lawn, as if they had wanted to talk to the snake-shaped hedges instead of to one another. "I didn't mean to be vainglorious," Uncle Monty began, using a word which here means braggy. "But I really am one of the most widely respected herpetologists in the world." Klaus blinked. It was an unexpected beginning to a conversation. "Of course you are," he said, "but because of this, I'm sad to say," Uncle Monty continued, as if he had not heard, "many people are jealous of me." "I'm sure that's true," Violet said, puzzled. "And when people are jealous," Uncle Monty said, shaking his head, "they'll do anything. They will do crazy things. When I was trying to get my herpetology degree, my roommate was so envious of the new toad I had discovered that he stole and ate my only specimen. I had to x-ray his stomach and use the x-rays rather than the toad in my presentation. And something tells me we may have a similar situation here." What was Uncle Monty talking about? "I'm afraid I don't quite follow you," Klaus said, which is a very polite way of saying, "What are you talking about, Uncle Monty?" "Last night, after you went to bed, Stefano asked me a few too many questions about all the snakes and my upcoming expedition. Do you know why?" "I think so," Violet had begun, but Uncle Monty interrupted her. "It is because this man who is calling himself Stefano," he said, "is really a member of the Herpetological Society, and he is here to try and find the incredibly deadly viper, so he can permit my presentation." "Do you three know what the word permit means?" "No," Violet said, "but it means that I think this Stefano is going to steal my snake," Uncle Monty said. "I present it to the Herpetological Society because it is a new species. There's no way I can prove I discovered it. Before we know it, the incredibly deadly viper will be called the Stefano snake, or something dreadful like that. And if he's planning that, just think what he will do to our Peruvian expedition. Each toad we catch, each venom sample we put into a test tube, each snake interview we record, every scrap of work we do will fall into the hands of this herpetological spy." "He's not a herpetological society spy," Klaus said impatiently. "He's Count Olaf." "I know just what you mean," Uncle Monty said excitedly. This sort of behavior indeed is as dastardly as that terrible man's. That is why I am doing this. He raised one hand and waved the folded papers in the air. As you know, he said, tomorrow we are leaving for Peru. These are our tickets for the 5 o'clock voyage on the Prospero, a fine ship that will take us across the sea to South America. There's a ticket for me, one for Violet, one for Klaus, and one for Stefano. But not one for Sunny, because we're going to hide her in a suitcase to save money. Depot. I'm kidding about that, but I'm not kidding about this. Uncle Monty, his face flushed with excitement, took one of the folded papers and began ripping it into tiny pieces. This is Stefano's ticket. We're not going to Peru. He's not coming to Peru with us, after all. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell him that he needs to stay here and look after my specimens instead. That way we can run a successful expedition in peace. But Uncle Monty, Klaus said, how many times must I remind you it's not polite to interrupt? Uncle Monty interrupted, shaking his head. In any case, I know you're worried about it. You're worried that will happen if he what will happen if he stays here alone with the incredibly deadly Viper. But don't worry, the Viper will join us on the expedition, traveling in one of our snake-carrying cases. I don't know why you're looking so glum, Sonny. I thought you'd be happy to have the Viper's company. So don't look so worried, Bambini. As you can see, your Uncle Monty has the situation in hand. When somebody is a little bit wrong, say when a waiter puts non-fat milk in your espresso macchiato instead of low-fat milk, it is often quite easy to explain to them how and why they are wrong. But if someone is surprisingly wrong, say when a waiter bites your nose instead of taking your order, you can often be surprised you are unable to say anything at all. Paralyzed by how wrong the waiter is, your mouth would hang slightly open and your eyes would blink over and over, but you would be unable to say a word. This is what the Baudelaire children did. Uncle Monty was so wrong about Stefano, in thinking that he was a herpetological spy rather than Count Olaf, that the three siblings would scarcely think of a way to tell him so. Come now, my dears, Uncle Monty said. We've wasted enough of the morning on talk. And we have to— Ow! He interrupted himself with a cry of surprise and pain and fell to the ground. Uncle Monty, Klaus cried.